instructor with 2 silver stars leaned back in his chair one Tuesday morning and pointed across a wooden table at a grey-bearded Englishman drinking cold black tea from a metal mug and said, loudly enough for every man in the room to hear him, "Playground soldiers, that's what you've sent me. Playground soldiers in fancy dress, and you want me to pretend they're operators." The Englishman he was pointing at was reading a paperback of Homage to Catalonia, and he did not look up. You should hold on to that image for a moment, because it is going to matter later on. A big American with a razor haircut and a laugh that filled the room. 3 of his own men grinning along with him. A Polish liaison officer in the corner, not grinning at all. Master Sergeant Wade Corbin had been running the joint advanced course at the schoolhouse for 18 months. He had been briefed 3 days earlier that a full sabre troop from Hereford was flying in to run through his program as guests and as evaluators, a courtesy invitation, a NATO nicety, a chance for 2 of the most respected units in the world to shake hands over a wooden table. He had spent those 3 days telling anyone who would listen that he was not impressed, that the regiment's reputation was a museum piece, that they were, in his exact words, tea-drinking hobbyists who had grown up watching Ross Kemp documentaries and mistaken it for training. And now, on the first morning, in front of his own men and in front of the guests themselves, he had put it into a sentence he could not unsay. He would remember saying it. He would be made to. He would be made to remember it that afternoon on his own range, and again the following morning in the Iwari forest, with a compass in a boy's hand, and again on the 3rd day in the shoot-house with a stopwatch running down, and finally on a wet Thursday at last light, when a lieutenant colonel in green ink wrote a single number at the bottom of a page and slid it across a table toward him, without a word. The insult was 5 seconds long. The correction took 4 days. And when the correction was finished, the man who had called them playground soldiers was standing at the edge of a helicopter pad in the North Carolina rain, counting men back onto an airframe, and he could not make his mouth work. That is the story. This is how it happened. To understand what happened at Fort Bragg that week, you have to understand that Wade Corbin was not a fool, and he was not earned the right to say what he said by accident. He had earned it the hard way. He had come into the United States Army in 2004, into the 75th Ranger Regiment at 19, and by 23 he had 2 combat tours in Iraq's western desert and a chest full of the small, unglamorous decorations you get for kicking doors that shoot back. He had 2 silver stars. He had a bronze star with valor. He had killed men at close range and pulled his own wounded out of buildings that were coming down around him, and when he told you he had done these things, he was not boasting, he was answering a question. He had been a senior instructor at the schoolhouse since 2022, running the Joint Advanced Close Quarter Battle and Long Range program, and his students, without exception, spoke about him the way you speak about a man who once saved your life without making a thing of it. In the lid of the green metal kit box he kept beside his desk, he had a laminated 4x6 photograph of his first Delta troop, taken outside a compound in Anbar in 2013. 4 of the men in the picture were dead now. He looked at that photograph every morning before he taught, and he had strong opinions about what an operator was and what an operator was not, because he had watched the difference get people killed. So when he stood in the common room that Tuesday morning with a can of energy drink in his fist and looked across the table at 3 grey-haired Britons in unmarked kit and 1 warrant officer reading Orwell, "What I've got here is men who tab up hills for a hobby. That is not the same thing as this job." One of the younger Delta men laughed. "Playground soldiers," Corbin said, and he pointed at Farrier's book with the base of his energy drink. "That's what you've sent me. Playground soldiers in fancy dress, and you want me to pretend they're operators." In the far corner, Chief Warrant Officer Marek Sawinski of Grom, who had fought alongside 2 of the men in that room in Helmand 13 years earlier, and had said good morning to Farrier and to no one else, folded his arms and looked at the floor. Farrier turned a page. Captain Ash, the young British troop commander, opened his mouth, and Farrier, without looking at him, laid 2 fingers flat on the table between them, and Ash closed his mouth. At the back of the room, standing in the doorway with a clipboard and a green ballpoint pen clipped to his shirt pocket, Lieutenant Colonel Preston Halbrook of United States Army Special Operations Command watched the whole exchange without any expression at all. Halbrook was there to observe the joint course and to write the after-action assessment that would go up to command. He wrote everything in green ink, because it made his notes easy to find in a stack, and he had already written 3 lines by the time Corbin finished speaking. He did not laugh, he did not frown, he wrote. Then he clicked the pen and put it back in his pocket, and he walked out. The insult was in the room. It was going nowhere, and in 4 days a piece of paper written in that same green ink was going to come back and land on the table in front of the man who had made it. By mid-afternoon, the sky over Fort Bragg had gone the flat white of a North Carolina spring, and the joint course had moved outside. The British troop walked across the compound in a loose file, kit bags over one shoulder, rifles slung muzzle down, and if you had been standing at the fence looking at them, you would have found it hard to say who they were. They did not walk like men who wanted to be looked at. 2 of them were talking quietly about a rugby match. One of them, Corporal Havers, the youngest, was fiddling with something in his chest pocket, and if you had been close enough you would have seen it was a small brass compass on a bootlace. Farrier walked at the back. He was not talking to anyone. He had left the Orwell in the common room. At the range, Corbin had them fall in. He gave them the briefing he gave every visiting course, and it was a good briefing. He walked them through the shoot-house complex, a full mock compound of breeze-block rooms with reactive targets and no-shoot civilians, and a live-fire annex the regiment did not have back at Pontrylas, and he told them, standing on the tarmac in front of it, with Master Sergeant Duros beside him, and the master stopwatch on a lanyard around Duros's neck, that the standard for a full clear of the compound was 10 minutes. 10 minutes, Corbin said. Every room, every threat down, every hostage safe. No team that has been through this schoolhouse in 18 months has done it faster. I have rangers on this base who cannot do it in 15. So when we run it on Thursday, gentlemen, I don't want anyone getting excited about the clock. I want you to focus on not shooting the wrong person. He looked at Farrier when he said it. Farrier nodded once, slowly, as though Corbin had said something helpful about the weather. They went to the 0 range first. The regiment's rifles were L119A2S, the Diemaco family carbines they had brought over in Pelly cases, and every man on the troop had his own weapon zeroed to his own eye, and it should not have been an interesting thing to watch. It was, though, if you knew what to look for. There was no talking. That was the first thing. On any range in the world where a dozen soldiers are getting their glass squared away, there is a background hum of chatter, a call for a spotter, a joke, an argument about wind, and on this range there was not. The men laid out their kit in a way that looked almost fussy, and then they shot, and between shots they did not speak. Bleasdale, the Welsh sergeant on the 4th firing point, was humming something under his breath, and it took Sergeant First Class Veck about 30 seconds to work out that it was a hymn. Staff Sergeant Tarrant, the sniper on the far end, was left-handed. He set his bipod, he settled behind his rifle, and before he took his first shot, he reached up with his right hand and tapped the bolt of his weapon twice, gently with the pad of his index finger. Nobody on the American side noticed. He shot a group of 5 rounds at 300 meters that would have been covered by a 2-pound coin. Then he opened the bolt, laid the rifle down, and drank from a small stainless flask. Veck walked down the line. He did it casually, the way a senior instructor's right hand walks a range, and he stopped behind each firing point for a second or two before he moved on. When he came back to Corbin, he was quiet. Corbin said, "Anything," and Veck said, "They're tidy." That was all he said. Then he looked back down the line, and he watched Bleasdale hum through another string, and he did not say anything else for a while. In the far corner, on a plastic chair against the wall of the range shack, Sowinski sat with a paper coffee cup in one hand and a cigarette he was not smoking in the other, and he watched the British troop, the way you watch a fight you have already seen the end of. Once, when Farrier walked past him to change out a magazine, Sawinski said something to him very quietly, in what might have been Polish, or might have been English, mangled by tiredness, and Farrier nodded, and neither man smiled. Corbin saw all of it, and read none of it. What he saw was middle-aged men shooting neatly on a beginner drill. What he did not see was a troop that had already in the first 20 minutes on his range told him everything he needed to know about them if he had been listening. He was not listening. He was standing at the tower with Duros and telling a story about a room in Mosul. By the time the light started to go, the British troop had put roughly 900 rounds through the zeroing lane between them, and Duros, checking the range log at the end of the day, found something odd. Every man on the troop had shot to the same standard, not the same as each other in the sense of close, the same in the sense of identical. There was no weak shooter. There was no showboat. There was a wall of competence laid out in 5-round groups down a range card, and it was so consistent it looked like it had been printed. Duros showed the log to Corbin. Corbin glanced at it, said, "Zero range doesn't tell you anything," and dropped it on the table. He was pointing at a loaded gun and telling himself it was a walking stick. The trigger was going to be pulled on Thursday morning, and the man holding the stopwatch when it went off was going to be Elton Duros, and the number on the stopwatch was going to be one Corbin had told his own students, from his own mouth, could not be done. The Wednesday drill was called Hydra on the range card, and it was a problem Corbin used to break the confidence of visiting units. 3 moving targets on a computer-driven rail system in a 20-meter lane, appearing and disappearing at random intervals between 2 and 6 seconds, with 2 no-shoot civilians on the same rail, and a hard-cover barrier at the halfway point that the shooter had to move around while transitioning between prone and standing. The pass mark was 8 of 9 plates down in under 30 seconds, with 0 no-shoots hit. In 18 months of the joint course, 12 visiting rangers had run Hydra, and 1 had passed. 2 Marine raiders had passed. No British visitor had ever run it, because no British visitors had ever been on the course. Corbin called Bleasdale up first. He did it on purpose. Bleasdale was the biggest man on the troop, broad-shouldered and heavy through the chest, and he did not look fast. Bleasdale walked to the start line, checked his rifle, and nodded at Duros. He was humming under his breath. Vec, on the tower with the timing display, heard it clearly through the open window. It was Cum Ronda. The buzzer went. Bleasdale went to prone in a way that did not look like going to prone. It looked like a large man deciding to be lower. His first target was already up at 4 meters left, and it was down before he had settled his elbow. His second target came up at 15 meters right, and he took it on the transition, still moving, without stopping his slide. The no-shoot appeared between 2 and 3, and he flowed around it. He rolled to his left onto his knee, brought the rifle across the barrier, took 2 plates on the far side of the lane in a single rhythm, 2 shots so close together the sound of the second overlapped the ring of the first plate, and then he was up, moving, humming, and the last 3 plates went down. 1, 2, 3, as he crossed the 20-meter mark. Duros looked at his stopwatch. He did not say the number out loud. He walked it over to Corbin, and he showed it to him. Corbin looked at the stopwatch, and then he looked at Bleasdale, who was already back at the start line with his rifle slung and a can of water in his hand, and he said, "Run it again." Bleasdale ran it again. He ran it in the same time to within 0.2 of a second. Corbin said, "Fresh targets, full reset, different sequence." Duros ran a fresh sequence. Bleasdale did the same thing, differently. He did not hum this time. He had noticed the tower window was open. Then Corbin called Havers up, the young corporal, the youngest man on the troop, the one with the compass in his chest pocket. He called Havers because Havers looked 20, and Corbin was trying to find the weak point. Havers tied Bleasdale to the 10th. Vec turned away from the timing display and looked at Corbin, and Corbin was not looking back. Corbin was looking at Havers, and there was something in his face that had not been there in the common room the day before. Duros walked up to Corbin and said, quietly enough that only 3 people heard him, "Wade, that's the 2 fastest Hydra times on the board, back to back, from the smallest and the youngest they've got." He said it flat. He was not smiling. He said, "The playground line, I would put that one back in the box." Corbin's face did not change. He said, "0 range, rehearsed drill, doesn't mean anything." He said it a little louder than he needed to. The 3 younger Delta men on the tower did not laugh this time. Sawinski, standing by the fence with his hands in his pockets, tilted his head slightly at Vec, and Vec looked away. Faria, at the back of the queue, was drinking from a metal flask. He had not run Hydra. He was watching his men, and he was writing something in a notebook the size of a passport. He had not spoken since breakfast. The rest of the troop ran Hydra one after the other. Every one of them passed. 9 plates down, no no-shoots, all inside 22 seconds. The slowest man on the troop was faster than the fastest visitor who had ever attempted the drill. Wednesday afternoon, Corbin took them to the Iwari. He did it on the grounds that Hydra was a rehearsed problem and land navigation was not, and that ground the British did not know would strip the polish off the shooting. The problem, he said, was hard. 5 points in 6 hours on a 240 square kilometre training area none of them had ever seen, with the middle point set at the top of a ridge that had no clean approach from any bearing, and the 5th on the back side of a cutover that would eat an hour of a man's legs if he took the wrong contour. Corbin had run the problem himself the previous month in 5 hours 40. He gave the British troop a paper map, a protractor, a compass, and no radio permission except in a medical emergency. He told them the cadre expected everyone in within the 6-hour window, and nobody was in any trouble if they were not. Vec said quietly on the way back, he said, "The old man will bring you in 4. Faria paired himself with Havers, which surprised none of the British and pleased none of the Americans, because Havers was 23 and Faria was 49, and the Iwari in April, after 2 days of rain, was not gentle ground. They stepped off at 2:10. There was no chatter on the net. There was no chatter on the ground. Havers moved with the brass compass held flat in the palm of his left hand, taking his bearings without stopping, and when he had to stop, he stopped for the count of 2, no more, and moved on. Faria walked behind him at a range of 6 meters. If Havers took a bearing wrong, Faria did not correct him. He waited, and Havers corrected himself within 30 paces every time. On the second leg, coming off the ridge, Havers went to ground for 11 seconds, listened, then rerouted them left by 15 degrees. Because a Delta observer team had been positioned at the obvious approach to catch anyone taking the easy line, Faria had not seen the team. Havers had heard a radio squelch at 400 meters. The other pairs behaved the same way. Tarrant and Bleasdale went south together and did not speak for the first hour. 2 of the junior troopers went east with a compass and a chocolate bar between them, and neither of them broke a sweat.